Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Success is a Choice podcast for the Coachable Coach series. This is where we talk with somebody who knows a little bit about coaching, but is very coachable, is looking to improve themselves, looking to grow, develop not only athletes, student athletes, but themselves or coaches as well. Today, we have on somebody who's not necessarily coaching in the traditional sense like he used to, but he's coaching coaches all over the world. JP Nerbun is joining us today. He is the host of the Coaching Culture podcast. He has written a couple books. If you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Rumble, I'm holding up some of his books. He's got Calling Up. He's also the author of The Culture System, a couple of great books. So JP, welcome to the Coachable Coach series on the Success is a Choice podcast network.
Jamie, love it. Appreciate it. I'm actually pumped after watching your little intro there on the video, and love your audience, love your work. So this is going to be fun.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. You're a former Division I athlete. You won the NIT Championship when you were at South Carolina, a former basketball coach. You've coached, I believe I'll probably leave something out, but you've coached in the United States, Lithuania, Sweden, or Ireland. All over. Yeah. You've coached a lot of places, a number of places, lots of experience, and now you're helping coach the coaches, and having coachable coaches is very important to you. That's the name of this segment, the name of this series. Oftentimes coaches want their athletes to be coachable, but yet coaches aren't coachable. Walk us through kind of your transformation as a coach into what you're doing now, and why are you doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I love the title of this series. I mean, I think this is a really important message. Like you said, there's a lot of coaches that aren't coachable there. My background is, like I coached internationally. I landed in Tennessee, was coaching high school basketball, and I would have said I was a coachable coach, but I really wasn't. I remember, when it came time to people making suggestions to me or giving me feedback on my coaching, I'd often get very, very defensive. And it wasn't until a few people really got through to me that I really started to make that change in a coach. And one was a parent. One parent came to me, but why was I more coachable in that moment than previous moments? Well, it's because that parent had a relationship with me and had actually shown that they were interested in who I was, not just the fact that I was a coach. Another one was I hired a guy named Jamy Bechler to coach me, to mentor me. And the reason for that is because I think I saw that he was a good person. I recognized his character. He offered me some practical ways to get better in my coaching. And I said, okay, well, this sounds like it's better than what I've been doing before, which I think is at the core of it. Like for me, I had to get over this hump of like, when you make a change in your coaching, a lot of times you want to say, oh my gosh, I'm saying I was a bad coach. And that's not it. What you're saying is, I'm just choosing to do it a better way. And I think that's where most coaches, I get defensive like myself, is like anytime someone gives you feedback, oh, you're telling me I'm a bad coach. No. We're just saying, here, have you considered doing it this way? It's a better way.
But yet that's how we approach our athletes often. We'll tell them, hey, these are areas you need to improve. I'm not saying you're a terrible player or you're lousy. These are just areas you need to improve. But then we don't translate that into our own lives.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's all the things that, we get on them about their sleep. We get on them about coming and rested, being on time. We get on them about, how they handle referees or how they handle mistakes. And then, all of a sudden, for some reason, there's this double standard that we hold them to when it comes to their behaviors. And I think we kind of justify it because of the reason I just mentioned there, but also because we're like, oh, I'm putting in all these hours, around film, and I recruit, and I there's just this vastly double standard when it comes to how we behave and how we even receive feedback, for sure.
So you do a lot of consulting with sports teams, different levels, different types of sports, but you're not just coming at it from all right, this is a theory, or, hey, I read some books, or I got a degree in this kind of stuff. You've actually lived it out both as a player, as a coach. You mentioned some of your story of, hey, maybe I wasn't doing it quite the way I should, but you wrote a book, Calling Up. It's a fictional book, and it's more designed for coaches to read that. And then now you wrote The Culture System, which is just essentially the Bible for culture. I mean, it's an amazing book, tons of stuff in it. Any coach should pick this up. Even an athletic director should pick this up. But one of the things that you talk about a lot is transformational versus transactional coaching. And maybe some coaches out there have heard that kind of stuff, but they don't think that they're either one necessarily. Maybe they've just heard those terms. Let us know kind of what this transformational coaching is and what the transactional coaching, because those tend to be major themes in your books.
Yeah, I think the big thing is a lot of people might even claim to be transformational coaches or think that they're on that path when they're not really. And I think the biggest area, to be a transformational coach or to claim to be one would be to say, my goal in coaching, my mission in coaching, my why in coaching is to make a difference in the lives of my players, right? Like I want to help people be better people, or my players become better people, become better men, better women, right? Like that's at the end of the day, like that's the mission, that's the why. But how we view the people in our leadership, that is at the core of what actually makes you transformational or not. Because if I show up every day and I could say my why is to make a difference, but when a player doesn't do what they're either asked to do, or there's some unacceptable behavior that they demonstrate, and I just see that as a problem, I see them as an obstacle to our team being successful, then I am objectifying that individual. Now, the same thing, if I see a player, I walk in the gym and I see a player that, if I could just get them to buy in, they'll help us win better. I can be very manipulative, right? And that way, without even knowing that. So, but then the player becomes a vehicle to my success. And then there's sometimes as a leader, we walk in and people are irrelevant to us. The ball boy, the manager, the janitor, and we don't really even acknowledge those people that are, that we become irrelevant to us. So if I see people as obstacles, vehicles are irrelevant, my mindset towards them, then that will come through my behaviors. And so then I'm operating from a transactional thing, because then everyone's about helping me to get what I want. It's all about what I'm going to get from these people, or how they might be providing obstacles to me getting to where I want to go. But the transformational coach is just coming out there looking to give. They are just like, how can I give the players struggling? They're struggling to buy in. They're struggling with attitude or effort. Okay, now I have an opportunity to help them grow through that experience. And that's the transformational coaching starts with how we see people. We can have a crafty why, but without actually seeing people as people, it means absolutely nothing.
So I'm a coach listening to this and I'm like, hey man, that sounds great. I want to be a transformational coach. I want to be a coach that makes a difference. Billy Graham says, coach will impact more people in a year than most people will do in a lifetime. I want to be that coach, but I also have to win, or else I don't keep my job, or I don't get a better job, or I can't put food on my table. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I think too, in my experience in working with coaches up to Division I, even professional level, the greatest pressure coaches face is the internal pressure. Like we might say, got to keep my job, but at the end of the day, I just was, speaking to Division I coach a little bit earlier today, and in the middle of a losing season, and their mindset is, oh my gosh, will I lose my job? And then the reality is, when we unpack it, it's like, honestly, some of these things and I'm struggling with, it's just more about my ego. So I would challenge a lot of people that that is really the biggest pressure you face, is the external one. And secondly, at the high school level and a lot of other levels, like, you lose your job, there's a lot more waiting for you. Yeah, really, honestly, like, there's so many people getting out of coaching. Will be okay. Nobody will starve in most situations. Right? I'm sure there's a few people listening that might say, well, I beg to differ. But for the majority of us, we're going to be okay. Right. And secondly, it's just like, if that becomes our deciding factor, is that we're going to operate from a place of fear, well, then you're never going to be a transformational coach. If you want to operate out of fear of what's going to happen if you don't win games, fear of what's going to happen if you don't win the big one, like fear of how other people will view you, what will they say about you? If you operate from that place of fear, then how are you ever going to love the people in your life right in front of you? And so you have to move from a place of, hey, what am I willing to be fired for? That's a really, really friggin' important question that we have to answer. We need to know that. And it's like, I'm willing to fire for these principles, for these values. And if you're not, right, then they're not really principles or values, are they?
Well, you watch every single press conference out there. When somebody gets hired, they talk about, we're going to come in and we're going to change the culture, or we're going to have a great culture. Culture is this buzzword all the time. You wrote a book about culture. What are a couple things that we as coaches listening to this, or even athletic directors, or even leaders in a business that might be listening to this? All right, I've used that word, the buzzword culture. How can and I know we need to go get this book. All right. We've linked it. We'll link it. Go get the book. Follow JP on Twitter, JP Nerbun, go get the book, but boil it down for us. What is culture? Why is it important? And how can we have a good culture? And is it our own fault? I just gave you like 4 questions there. But kind of unpack that in simple terms.
Well, the culture is made up of 2 things. It is the standards of the program, the behaviors. It's what people do. It's the attitude they would do it with. It's their effort. It's their attitude. It's their, it's why they do it. Right. But there's also the other aspect of culture, which is the relationships. It's the connections. How connected are people? Now, the reality is you can't have really meaningful, strong relationships with your athletes if you do not hold them to a standard, right? If you do not challenge them. So you can't have strong relationships and weak standards. They just don't exist at the end of the day. They won't last. And vice versa. You can't have, if you just come in with a lot of rules, a lot of standards, you can't have high standards and weak relationships, because eventually the players will stop working hard. They'll stop having a good attitude if you haven't invested in them as people. So standards and relationships go hand in hand, and it's driven by the leader themselves. The leader drives the culture, and that's you. The head coach is the first and foremost responsible for that. We are to blame for the lack of growth in our culture. Your culture could be in a really bad situation. I mean, I've got to work with coaches, and they work in really rough situations, really rough schools, and the kids coming in there have so many issues. Or you take over a Division I program and you're inheriting all these knuckleheads, right, that just aren't bought into what you do. Okay, right? You might have what some would say a bad culture. I mean, I would just say culture is what it is. It's just really about, are you taking it forward? So you're responsible for the nurturing of that. And I think that's really how it comes about. And I mean, I think we talk a lot about culture building. I like to really, instead of us seeing ourselves as builders, where we just kind of go in there and level everything and then build it from the ground up, I actually look at us as gardeners, right? So we come in and we can nurture the good, and then we got to kind of weed out the bad. But it's a process, and it's organic, and every environment's different. It's we don't start from a clean slate in culture. We can't come in and clean house and remove everybody. It just doesn't happen in most situations, most businesses, most teams. And so we have to become a very caring gardener in that situation.
What are some of the biggest mistakes or things you see that coaches do to sabotage their culture, or to sabotage their team, or just to shoot themselves in the foot, metaphorically speaking?
Yeah, right off the bat, they're going to come in and they're going to have this clear vision of how things should be. They're going to have the plan, and they're going to come in and try to implement the plan. Like, it's just my way, I've had this vision. I've spent the last few years building towards this, and you just don't see that in the great ones. The great ones come in and they start to say, okay, hey, they've got ideas, but they're going to start with sitting down with people and saying, hey, what's already working here? What do we enjoy about this place? And then what's not working? What don't we enjoy? And then what suggestions do you have for making change? And the reality is we're involving people in the process for change. And that's absolutely critical. I mean, you even see that when Theo Epstein took over the Cubs to then lead them to a World Series. He kind of came in and said, hey, yeah, we were successful in Boston, but I'm not going to come in and just implement the same thing that we did in Boston. And he sat down, they had that 4 or 5 day summit where he shared some of his principles, his ideas, but he also started to get everyone, every stakeholder, all the coaches, all the scouts, all the people in the front office in there talking about how they could, change, essentially formulate this mission or the Cubs way, this philosophy, and that merge that with a system, a way that it's practically, okay, we value the development of every player. What's that going to look like? And so that's the other big thing I'd mention is I think a lot of times we operate in theory and principles and things that sound good. Okay, you value the development of every individual player in your team. How do you actually do that? What does that look like for you as an organization? And a lot of people just don't have that. They don't have these practical ways to bring those principles, those values to life. And so you've got to have a system, a very clear set of tools and methods that are going to consistently come back to building relationships, establishing those standards, and then reinforcing and enforcing those things. You have to have that, or else, at the end of the day, the culture will break down.
So how does this look on a day-to-day basis? So I'm a high school coach, I'm teaching my science or I'm teaching my phys ed or whatever during the day. Now I got practice and I'm furiously scribbling notes or whatever, getting to practice, going through practice. How does this look kind of from a practical standpoint of implementing my culture when I also have to put in my zone offense? I also have to teach this kid. I have to teach JP how to use his left hand, those kinds of things. How do those align?
Yeah, there's a few key things that you can do early on in the year to start to set yourself up for how that day-to-day should operate. Because really, culture isn't like always built in these team activities or these team meetings. So early on, there should be some clear meetings with players on an individual basis at the beginning of the year, one-on-one, to talk about what's important to that individual, ask them those things, and really help those individuals set individual goals and team goals, and some, commitments they're going to make to that. You should definitely, set team standards and talk about how you want to be held accountable to those standards. And, maybe coaches might have a leadership, I talk about a leadership system. So there's things you'll do early on, but then once you've got that kind of set, I do think it's great to make time for the team to connect. You just create space for the team to connect as people off the court or off the field. But really the day-to-day is about how we are continuously supporting, showing care with players. Like when I go observe like practices or games, like are coaches really interactive? Are they connecting? Are they chatting and are having quick little one-on-ones, collisions with players where they're continuously investing in those relationships? And then on the other side of that, are they enforcing the standards? And I think, on a day-to-day basis, like we think we got to solve the culture piece in the pre-practice meeting, the end of practice meeting, or the meeting on the Saturday when we've lost 3 in a row and the people have had bad attitude. It's like, no. The culture is already fallen apart, or the practice standards have already slipped at the end of practice. And now we decide to give a 10-minute lecture about how we need them to come work harder. It's in the moments of practice where you have to actually use, an enforcement of standards, and not a fear-based way, but like some progressive logical consequences of just that reinforce the standard that say, hey, we all set a standard for ourselves here. And if we're not going to meet that, you're going to lose the opportunity. You're going to lose the privilege to be a part of this drill or to get better in this moment.
Well, and I kind of led you into that with the practice part, but to be a transformational coach or to be the coach that you're meant to be, I would imagine that you need to be doing certain things outside of practice as well. So how you greet your kid when they come into the lobby or come into your office, or when you see them in the hallway, those kinds of things, almost like how you do anything is how you do everything. Your culture is more than just what happens those 2 hours of practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think though coaches are looking for that, game-changing meeting that's just going to, be the thing that saves their season, or the video and the discussion. And those things are good. And it's about being consistent in those things. And not always being reactive, but being upstream about them, like, putting things in place. But really, it's so much around the conversations that we're having with players. And honestly, it's conversations that maybe have nothing to do with our sport. It's just conversations where you're investing in and showing them that you have care for them as a person. And those type of investments, honestly, they allow us to eventually, when they know that we care, they allow us to actually coach them harder, to challenge them, even make mistakes in the way we do that. Maybe we're not perfectly effective in our communication when it comes to, how we give the criticism, but they'll be willing to forgive that because they've got the relationship there.
Well, in your book, The Culture System, a proven process for creating an extraordinary team culture, awesome resource tool for any coach. But on the front, there's a quote from Monty Williams, a 2022 NBA Coach of the Year. It says, a proven model that will help any coach at any level grow as a leader and build a stronger team. How do you feel that you made it possible for the Phoenix Suns to go to the finals and for Monty to be Coach of the Year? Do you have a little trophy there? A little, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But what high praise from a class act, a great coach. Obviously you wanted to write this book to help coaches. Did you, as you were writing this brand new book, did you discover anything new? Did you, as you were writing it, did you say to yourself, man, I wish that, like, did you come to some new conclusion as you were writing it, or did it pretty much flow exactly the way you thought it would?
Well, first off, I'm very, very grateful for Monty, and his support the last few years, and just, obviously not responsible for him being Coach of the Year or anything like that. But, to have had even a small impact on his coaching, is huge. It's cool to see it at that level, just as it is huge to see it at a high school coach's level, right? I take great pride in being able to impact coaches in that way. It means a lot. Back to my learnings as I wrote the book. I think one of the big things for me was having this idea of this systematic process that makes it easy for people to do. And sometimes, like, you think you've come up with something that's an original thought or idea, and then you realize it's not original. Like, one of the stories I talk about there is about the Toyota way, and then how Toyota, which has the Toyota production system, which is in the manufacturing world, is lean. I actually didn't read about that until like probably the last couple of months of writing the book. And I have been talking about systems, and I have recognized this idea around systems, and essentially that coaches or leaders that build great cultures, they have these tools, they have these processes and methods that they use, and they're consistent at them over time. They're consistently investing in relationships. They're consistently working to raise the standards. And they have different ways of doing that I share these common tools and methods that I've seen. But, it's just really cool to see that, oh, well, actually, this wasn't like that original, man. Like the Toyota production system is one of the most valuable tools that has been used across, in the corporate world today. Like, Amazon has literally built their company using lean, right? They've taken everything from Toyota and they've been able to apply it to their fulfillment centers. And that was fascinating. It was just to start to see that this approach is being used at the corporate level, and some of the biggest businesses in the world was really fascinating for me, that I didn't even realize when I started out.
Well, as we wrap up here, great insights. What would be a couple takeaways, maybe reinforcing what you've already said, or a couple new ideas that you would have for a coach watching this? And it doesn't matter if you're watching this or listening to this, if you've got it all, you got it all figured out. Your culture's great. You've been winning. You've been impacting people. You got to continually fight for that culture. You got to fight for that every day. So it's not something that you can just rest on your laurels about. So that kind of coach, or even a brand new coach, or a coach new to this concept of, I can be a transformational coach. I can be more than just someone who's seeking wins and losses. So a couple takeaways for coaches as we wrap up here.
Yeah, I'll give you two here. One, I think, is in your conversations with your athletes, start to see your role differently. I think a lot of us go into those conversations looking to tell athletes what they need to change. And we can, without even realize that, we're doing a lot of lecturing. So reflect on your conversations with your athletes. How much are you talking? How much are they talking? How much are you, how many questions are you asking versus how many statements that are telling? And really start to see yourselves as like their mentor coach, And so great mentor coaches, they ask great questions. First off, they want to figure out what the individual's goals are. What's important to them? Why is that so important to them? For them, their experience, for their, what they want to achieve, and for who they want to become. Secondly, ask them questions to draw awareness to where they actually see themselves in relation to those things. And when we do that, when we help them recognize their current reality, they're much more likely, if they have a level of awareness, to take ownership. Awareness precedes ownership. If they don't have an awareness of where they are, they'll never take ownership of that. So secondly, move into, where's their reality? And the third thing I would say is, okay, what ideas do they have for solutions? And so this comes back to, that idea of around autonomy being so important to intrinsic motivation. If they feel like they're part of the solution, then they're much more likely to take ownership of the solution. So some of the ideas might come from you, but allow them to start to suggest ideas to kind of close the gap from where they are to where they want to be. And then get really clear on what they're committed to doing and how you can support them in that. And so that's just you having a coaching conversation with those individuals. Some of the coaches I work with, they document that process. Other coaches, it's just continuously informal stuff, or they journal on it. But then they come back to players about that. They come back to players, try to do it on a monthly basis to sit down with them one-on-one, or they just come back to those in like tough moments. Like, hey, we talked about this. This is important to you. You said you need to be doing these things. Like, what's going on? How can we help you? Is this still important to you? So seeing yourself more as a mentor coach will be vastly different. And it'll help you when you then do have to like enforce them and hold them accountable, because you've set up that kind of agreement, that accountability agreement, and they're going to be much more likely to accept some of the consequences that you might have to enforce as a leader within the organization.
Well, he's JP Nerbun, and he has played at a high level. He's coached all over the world. He's written awesome books. He's got a great podcast, Coaching Culture podcast, that he hosts along with Nate Sanderson. Great guests, great insights. Highly recommend that. And obviously, you listen to podcasts, you watch podcasts, or else you wouldn't be watching or listening to this one. So maybe check that out. Maybe you can add a new podcast to your feed, the Coaching Culture podcast. And while you're doing that, if you would, be so kind, go ahead and subscribe to this podcast if you're not already doing that, so it automatically comes to your feed as well. And if you would, go ahead, take just a minute, 5 stars, say something nice. And you don't even have to say something nice about me. Say something nice about JP. Hey, that was a great guest. JP was an awesome guest. That Jamy guy, not so much, but JP was a great guest. But anyways, JP, really appreciate your time. Appreciate what you're doing for coaches, and ultimately athletes all across the world, not just the United States. So thanks so much for that. Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity and appreciate all your work into inspiring and encouraging coaches. It's a tough road, and they definitely need more of that.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it. And for everybody watching this on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Rumble, if you're listening to this on the Success is a Choice podcast, once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all you do to impact the youth of our world and making the world a little bit better. And remember, until next time, success is a choice. What choice will you make today?